Hello everyone. I am James the novelist, and this is the Lit James podcast where we discuss books and writing of African origin. For today's special episode, we shall be discussing with Oris Aigbokhaevbolo. Oris is a Nigerian film and music critic. In 2015, he won the Afrima Entertainment Journalist of the Year, and since then, he's represented himself and Nigeria on the global stage at various film festivals across the world. Oris also runs Efiko magazine and is one of the few Nigerians who vote on the Golden Globe Awards. Welcome, Oris.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, about 3 years ago, you stormed the literary space with an essay, "The Death of Nigerian Literature." This brought back a lot of backlash. The essay is very packed, and there's so much to talk about that I feel like I would require maybe 6 episodes, if I was to, take out every paragraph. But why did you write that essay?
It's 3 years later, so I don't know if I remember the exact all of what led to it. But I talked about the macro elements that kind of led to it. As you are probably aware, I've been in the literary space. Well, I've been writing or publishing since maybe 2010, 2011. At which point I was just about to leave the University of Benin, where I studied pharmacy. And at the time, I felt that, okay, I would like to be a writer. And so I did what I could to get into the scene. That meant that I was writing for, I think the first paper that published me was either The Sun or Guardian. I don't remember anymore, locally at least. And so that happened. And then by 2014, I decided to live in Lagos. And one of the very first fields to welcome me, even if I was maybe mostly known initially as a film critic, I'm not sure anymore, was the literary scene. And I had been part of the literary scene in Abuja, at least a little bit on the periphery, because I was doing my internship in pharmacy at the time. Came to Lagos in 2014 and got into the scene here as well. And by the pandemic, which of course happened 6 years after I showed up in Lagos, 2020, it felt to me that there was a change. There was a decline in both the readership of Nigerian writing and what I think of as the writership too of Nigerian writing. And the pandemic, I think, was in chemistry, we say the rate limiting step, this step where something happens and this is what changes everything in the reaction. So I think the pandemic was the rate limiting step for what I consider as decline in our readership and our writership in Nigeria. And I looked at it scene at the time and I wasn't saying what I wanted to see. I read a lot of global literature and I follow the scenes there as well, especially like the American and the UK one. So I felt, okay, they still had something going on. I wasn't really sure what was going on in ours. So that essay came as a reaction to what I was saying that I didn't like. And I felt, okay, guys, this is what is happening. There were writers that I knew who left writing, of course, for more lucrative opportunities.
Yeah.
The writers I know who left Nigeria, of course, for greener pastures. And the writers who left both. They left both Nigeria and they left writing as well. So this was like my way of, okay, what has happened here? Plus, and this is one thing I think that got missing in the controversy was it was kind of a lament for me personally. Of course, by 2010, 2011, I was still in school or just shortly out of school. I'm in Lagos, finding my way as an adult, who is now out of school and everything, trying to build his own life. By 2020, I'm fully fledged adult. And it looks to me like my peers who had stuck to pharmacy or the medical or whatever, my doctor friends, my pharmacist friends, and my dentist friends, I felt like they had actual careers and they could see actual progressions, so to speak. The guys who were in business, the same thing as well. The guys who were in tech, whatever it is, and I felt I wasn't sure that those kind of steps to a particular kind of future was available in writing, which is where I had gone to teach my tent. So a part of it was also that lament. So it was looking at the scene and saying, hey, this is what's happening. Also looking at my own life and saying, hey, here is what is happening. In the, as you probably know, the reaction that came out subsequently, all of that lament was kind of cut out of the conversation. Everybody was focused on the fact that I was speaking about the scene. I maintain that I was saying the truth. We'll talk about all of that later. But yes, this is what led me to write that essay. But I didn't think that there was anybody else who was willing to do that kind of a job to say, hey, here's where the scene is at. Here's what I think about the scene. And remember, 2017 or 2016, that's a few years before, I written another different essay, but also looked at the scene as well. And the time that was mostly about my feeling or my thinking or my observation that a lot of our writing was essentially about trauma, you know? And so that, of course, that essay was the very first time I wrote an essay that caused all kinds of, I don't know, backlash, so to speak, in the scene. So in a sense, I think of part of my job as a writer as documenting my time. I always wanted to do that in 3 fields because I think that if you read a country's or a region's books, you have an idea of how they think. Same thing too if you listen to their music, what their values are. If you watch their movies, you also can tell, okay, this is what these people consider as important. Across all 3 fields, you can tell where a culture is at.
Yeah.
So my own job, because those 3 fields are what I'm super, super interested in for all of my life, I look at them and I'm saying, hey, here's where we are. So that's why I don't think maybe people do that in their houses. For me, I like to do it in public. I think about it in private. I bring it out in public too, because I'm like, okay, can we say where we are at for everybody to be aware? So for the trauma writing one, I looked at the scene and said, hey, here's where we are at in our literature. And I don't think it's particularly nice.
Yeah.
For the literary one, for the death of Nigerian literature essay, it was more like, okay, here's where we are 5 or 6 years after I've written that first one. So maybe this means that in another 2 or 3 years,
it may not be titled The Rise of Nigerian Literature. So basically, it was born out of the personal and relative lamentation of the literary.
I think if people who were not, I guess, prejudiced in any way, either against myself or against the truth about the same,
Yeah.
When looking at it, I think, yes, and you'll see that it's a lament, both on a personal level and on a collective, cultural level.
All right. You wrote this book. You saw this essay. Yeah. You clearly expected a lot of backlash.
Really?
Okay, you expected a lot of backlash.
I don't know.
But what I think you did not expect was hatred. Especially hatred disagree with the points you raised in the essay, but felt offended by, the arrogance of the writer since they couldn't find holes in the writing itself. Did you expect that much hatred?
No. I didn't, to be honest, I didn't expect. Okay, no, that's not fair. Vitriol, yeah. I don't think I expected the vitriol. But that's not, when I was writing it, I did not expect that it would have as much responses, both in terms of the agreement, the hate, all of those things, I don't think I expected that. But my friend, who is the other person who runs the Fico magazine with me, had said that she had thought that was she saw it before it got published. So she thought it was it was a quote cooler essay than some of the things I've written in the process, including the one about trauma. So in that sense, maybe she lulled me into a false sense of security, It wasn't going to be the case that there was going to be a lot of backlash this time. But obviously you got wrong. So I thought I thought that these people will think about it, but I don't think I expected the amount of hate, because yes, I did see a few tweets and that's the thing that disturbs me, because I'm not naive to not understand that people who just don't, I guess, like whatever I stand for as a person, I guess. The people who always see this as, I hate that guy's face. And those people like that, I'm not naive to say, hey, there are not people who exist like that. The thing that kind of troubled me about some of the, of course, not all of them, but some of them, was this, what I feel like was a willful misunderstanding of what I was saying. Like I said, it was more like a language. It's so funny. The very first paragraph essentially says something about how I'm lamenting my misspent youth.
Yeah.
How can you take that as arrogance? So it's a very funny thing, that happens. When people show up to a particular piece with their own baggage, I guess, the writer, then also, there's also maybe in Nigeria, a culture of silence. You can talk about these things at the beer parlor. You can discuss them on a silent podcast within you and your friends. You can talk about them in church or wherever, or whatever meetings you guys have. But once it comes out in the public, those same persons who have discussed these matters, because I believe that as writers, we are kind of thinkers, they take an unusually hostile position against what they know to be true. And so that disturbs me. I think of that as dishonesty. Of course, the phrase or the cliche is intellectual dishonesty. But honestly, I think that sometimes I don't even think it's intellectual. It's unknown dishonesty. That's the bit that kind of surprised me. That, okay, you guys, I assume that all of you are literate, but you're showing me that maybe you're not so literate after all. And because I have no problem with somebody disagreeing with me on an intellectual level, we are engaging actually with what is on the page. But when it seems to me like you are going not just beyond what's on the page, but also against what I even wrote in the piece. I remember that there was someone who said, this is almost a story, but I remember recently somebody said something about how I didn't get into an MFA program. That's why I'm hitting on people who I never applied. But it doesn't even matter. Funny, it doesn't even matter if I even did apply, because how can you know that information? But he's putting it out there in public as though it is. How do you know that this person applied? That's what I'm trying to say. That sometimes it's just a little dishonesty. Because if it's something that you're actually engaging with what's on the page, I have no problem with that. I'm very fine. I'm a big, fan of engagement on a certain level. I'm very happy to talk with anybody who disagrees with me. People disagree with me, that's fine. But I don't like when people are lying. I didn't write that in the essay. Why are you talking as though I did that? So that's the part that I was surprised about, that, okay, persons who I assume that are literate and convinced, you're showing me that, you know what, maybe we just start read.
I think I should put it out there that just based off Oris's writing as a student in pharmacy in Uniben, as at that time, he could have gotten into an MFA. Just based on that alone, before he graduated from school. So I think the first thing that struck me in the entire essay was that you said the models for literary life in Nigeria have never been quite clear. When success happens to an English writer, he acquires a new tech writer. So, which was, Amy wrote that decades ago, you said. When success happens to an American, he acquires a new life. And I can actually attest to that from some essays about George Bernard Shaw. When his first play, became a hit, yeah, he became a celebrity overnight. But then nobody knows what happens when success happens to a Nigerian writer. He might acquire space in the story published in the US or the UK journal. Beyond that, nobody knows. I would have added he might get an American residency or a British passport.
It is him that said that.
But why do you think that is the case?
I think it's all part of the whole thing about like a decline, that we can't tell anymore what success means for the Nigerian writer, because it's just not visible on that scale. If maybe there was a time, maybe what I wrote was short-sighted, that maybe there was one time where it was obvious, you became a showinka, and then the whole world knew who you were and everything, or something. But I think in the past decade or two, it is no longer clear that, okay, how do you even succeed as a writer? When I'm hearing some of the figures, that, now of course, if you're not, by the way, Adichie is not part of this discussion. Only an African, only a Nigerian writer. But the point is, for everybody else, how many copies are you selling enough for you to be able to like alter your life if you're a writer? They probably go abroad and get a residence or something. But beyond that, I don't think anybody will know. So I think it's just because the spoils are so little and so the fights are so intense. If you were in oil and gas, you can technically speak, I don't know, there's a Lumelu in oil and gas. There was also Nafuru, also of separate. The guys in banking probably have a few things. And so it almost feels like it's enough to go around. For writing, it feels like, okay, all of you are trying to get 2 or 3 spaces that are available in the US or in the UK. So, but if there are only 2 or 3 spots, how does that work? So it probably means that you get, I don't know, some kind of PR gig with the government or with one big man somewhere, which is no longer the kind of writing I was talking about. It's not literary writing. So I think my answer to that is, it's just not clear, because success as a writer is so infinitesimal that it is too small for anybody, but I guess maybe your friend, to see. So for instance, I get published by Washington Post and my friend goes, hey, they retweet it. That's about it. So that's the size of the success.
Yeah.
Nobody who is beyond that immediate, my immediate retweeting relationship knows what has happened. If I instead had become a governor or a commissioner, over the
True.
you know, that's in politics. If you became, I don't know, the ED at a bank, they'll kill a cow for you. There's so many things that happens for different spaces if you become successful. It's just not clear what exactly would happen to you if you vote, right? Because the gifts, the rewards are like this.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to move to other parts of the essay where I think you talked about how Lagos used to be, or rather used to have a preponderance of sports, you know, for writers and events for literally minded folks to mingle. You lamented the obvious decline of such spaces and how that in itself is a sign for decline of literary culture.
Yes.
Personally, I like to think, bro, COVID happened. You know, also, I also think that these spaces have been replaced by social media. You know, where people now just air their views openly, you know, without waiters willing them to buy a drink that will eventually pay their wages. But I also think social media at best, you know, triumphs at what I call superficial fluency, which I won't, should I AI speak now, delve into. Do you not think that those book readings and folk concerts that you talked about have been replaced by spaces on Twitter, Instagram Lives, and Q&As on other platforms? Book influencers and reviewers now used to gather like minds?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, okay, yeah, it's a good point. There's a sense in which some of those things have moved to the internet. I mean, I can't look that. That's entirely fine. But I guess for me, the thing is, I like expansions, you know, rather than replacements. So if that's happening on the internet, that's fine. But I'm also thinking that it's not mutually exclusive that happens and this one cannot happen. They should be able to happen together. And that's kind of what I'm saying that I think I saw back in the day, even now. I mean, if you're talking about, let's leave literary culture outside, a relationship, you meet a person you like on the internet. One of the things you're trying to do sometimes is, hey, can we see in person? You understand? So I'm saying that, yeah, so even if that happens on the internet, there's also like a space for a physical convening. And that's kind of what I felt like we had. And pandemic, it was already kind of in decline because people are leaving the country. So my own thing is, I saw you're saying, you're indeed right that yes, to an extent, a lot of the things that used to be now happen on the internet. The problem though is that, like I said, that just means that the physical thing is being replaced. And I think that instead we should have both so that we can be an expansion. But also to use that as official fluency. There's also a certain level of, again, dishonesty. Yeah. I think that is probably there on the internet. And even if you are writers, you have to admit that there are times when the text on the screen doesn't adequately convey some of the other things that you know, there. So I have been a regular customer of getting dragged on the internet over the past maybe 2 or 3 months, you know, almost every 2 weeks, somebody has a big issue with me on the internet and then there's all of this, which is entirely fine. But I suspect that if I was saying that to somebody or to a crowd in person, they might not necessarily respond in that really vicious, brutal manner that you sometimes see on the internet. So what that means is maybe there's a better space, there's a more civil space for disagreements and arguments offline than there is on the internet. Because for places like Twitter especially, it feels like the algorithm rewards outrage.
Yeah.
It rewards negativity. And there are people who live for that kind of engagement. And so that's kind of what they want to put out. I've seen a few persons who I know met or maybe because before they left the country. And I'm sometimes surprised by how it feels like I have never been able to tweet anything that they've ever agreed with in their lives. You know? Because what happens is that you tweet something they agree with or they like, and they don't really like or they don't really say anything about it. Yeah. But the instant they don't like something, they're quick to attack.
Yeah.
Because I think these people are Olodus, to be honest. They have a group of unthinking persons, this group of Olodus who of course feed off that negativity as well. And so suddenly you have this Olodo saying, this Olodo saying, this Olodo saying, so you don't have a conflagration. In person, you might not be able to, like, at least not around me, it's usually very rare that I'm ever able to be surrounded by that amount of Olodos that take content. you know, there might be two Olodos somewhere, but there's two other people who are really smart. You get, and so you can have a decent discussion. And sometimes the Olodos might not live any wiser, which is fine. But sometimes they might see something because there's nobody actively clapping for their foolishness. On the internet, foolishness can be really clapped for. Like a few weeks ago, where I said something about how Nigerians can't write, which by the way is true. The point I was making is, look, we have a very terrible education. So what that means is that even on the level of, I'm not talking about, again, people made a mistake of it. It's not storytelling.
Yeah.
Writing. Put this sentence here and let it be fine. Put another sentence after it and let it make sense. All of that. That is a thing that is directly related to education.
Yeah.
You get, and everybody, most people are aware that Nigerian education is inferior to, like, what you assume as the global standard where we should ideally be.
Yeah.
So people are giving birth and they're like, hey, we want our kids to school, even in Ghana. You get, if they cannot afford the US or the UK or something. You get, there's a reason why that's the case. They intuitively know that, okay, no, what you're getting is probably not enough for all our kids to compete globally. Let them go somewhere else. If you know that, how are you having a problem somewhere telling them you really can't write? But that Olodo ship will not let them make that connection because it's getting clout. The foolishness is getting clouts. People are getting excited by it on the internet. And so they would not know what to think about that. But in person, they might have been able to, like, engage if there was somebody else to say, you know what, how about you think about it in this particular way? So there is that whole thing that that happens.
I do see where you're coming from, and yeah, and I do agree with most of the things you have said. Mostly because even when maybe the person is not even being, it is just that the person is just from a place of, deliberate ignorance to not see,
Yes.
we are trying.
Sometimes, yes. Like I said, the people who also retweet it, they mistake.
Yeah.
They have defined
this guy.
Yes, exactly. They have defined their identity as anti-Oris. So whatever it is Oris is, they have to be against it.
Let's get into the second
of the essay.
Yeah. And you laid out, I mean, you sort of touched upon this anyways, but you laid out, the reasons for the harsh literary climate that we live in Nigeria, especially the low financial reward and declining in leadership. You attributed this to lower educational standards, which you've talked about. Military occupations disdain for writer. Yeah, especially, exactly. Fall of the cane price and its Western backings.
Yeah.
And also the juicier career alternatives for young people who might have had the talent to write or would rather, go into tech, write codes, rather write codes than sentences. Yeah. What do you think is the solution?
Unfortunately, since I wrote that essay 3 years ago, I suspect that I am now even more pessimistic about literary culture in Nigeria. Somebody wrote an essay for a magazine I'm in recently, and she was talking about book clubs, especially it was run by women, which I incredibly, I was fascinated by. So these things will always, I guess, exist. The thing is, for me, is I would like a critical mass of persons who are dedicated to these things, engaging with it. And again, seriously, there's a place for all of the light-hearted kind of writing. All of that is also literature as well. But I want that to exist. There was always other, like, more serious kind of writing to also be there. It looks like there's a lot of focus on this rather lighter stuff and not enough on the serious stuff going forward. And even the lighter stuff, I don't even think it's as much as I would like it to be. So there's just a general decline. So unfortunately, I honestly don't think that there is a solution. Yes, I'm rather pessimistic about it. And I say this as a person who is running a literary magazine. Literally, in fact, it's not a funny thing because people willfully ignore the fact that I wrote an essay with the title, The Death of Nigerian Literature, in the very first issue of a magazine that my friend and I started. So already there's a bit of contradiction in that I am lamenting the death of something. At the same time, I'm doing what I can to make it live, which is what the magazine is supposed to be. It's supposed to be just a celebration of literature. We publish poems, we publish essays, we publish fiction as well. You get so, but I'm saying that since then, I just don't think that as a culture, as a country, we care enough. One of the things that we need to do, if, of course, okay, let me not speak as the person who is thinking hopefully about the solution, is you have to go back to the beginning. My whole fascination with literature began because I was a curious kid. I've always liked to read. When I was at the University of Benin, I came across a bunch of books, 3 books, one short story collection called The Art of Fiction, which had a bunch of those Western greats, the dead white men who are great. Then the second book that was important was the Paris Review Interviews. One of them, volume 4, 1950 something, I think. And it had like an interview with Ernest Hemingway. And that interview kind of ruined my life, like I keep saying, because I could have been a gentle pharmacist, like just cool in his house, you know, but then that thing kind of pushed me to say, you know what, this is a life that you want to lead, a life of thought, a life of writing, a life of reflection. So for my point is this, we need to fix education. I studied pharmacy, University of Benin. You studied medicine, University of Benin. I think between us, we can agree that even if we did the best what we were given, I don't think we're giving the best. Exactly. I don't think any of us was giving the best. And so that's what so for me, that's the thing. So when I go speak about literature sometimes, I'm speaking about literature in terms of like storytelling and thought like that and arts and everything, but also looking about practical stuff, literacy. I never, like, if you before, because of course you study pharmacy, you study medicine, you are spending at least 6 years. But the people, of course, who are doing like 4-year courses. I remember that one of them, who was 4 or 5 years course, was meant to graduate in a few weeks. That was 2 years before, or a year before I left. And I came across something he'd written. And I was astounded at how bad it was. You know, I'm not talking about on the level of art, ignore arts, literacy. Like I said, you have your subject, you have your verb, you have your object. And if it's more complex than that, you know. But I was like, okay, I'm going to get this in a few weeks. And I don't think that you can necessarily write a great email to your potential employer or even employee, whatever it is. If you're not fixing that, literature is like a superstructure. The actual infrastructure, the actual foundation is, okay, be literate. Read right. I mean, even read writes, maybe arithmetic. That one is a problem. And even I hear now that JAM is even reducing the standards for that. So that's the thing. We need to be able to fix education. I see it all the time there. The 2 most important things for any leader who should come into Nigeria is security and education. Security is how you secure the people right here, right now. This is how you secure the future. Those are the 2 things that are the most important. It looks to me like at the moment, by the way, it seems that we are failing on both sides. But for this discussion, education in particular is like the thing. So unless we fix that one, it is difficult for us to speak about fixing literature, because that ground is already a problem. Yeah. So my solution would be that, you know what, ignore literature. Let's fix literacy. No, yes, okay, education, but let's fix literacy. You know, we will come back to literature in a few years. But can we fix literacy so that if anybody, I think in my father's generation, perhaps, if you went to the equivalent of secondary school, you were fine in terms of like reading, writing, and arithmetic. Yeah, you were fine. But today, I knew persons who were leaving school and could hardly put together a bunch of sentences to make sense. If we fix that, then maybe one day we'll do a part 2 of the James podcast and come to discuss literature. But let's fix that first.
So maybe one day, if literacy is fixed, we can have 12, 13-year-old Nigerian girls with typing technical. I'm thinking, I can do this. Like John Didion was doing for Hemingway. Imagine how 13, you can look at his sentences. I can do this. Yes. Not, I can write this story, but I can. Yes, I can. Special.
Yes, the way it appears on the page. I can put this word and this word and this word, and it will make sense. Yes, you want to be able to have like teenagers who read the technical, appreciate it and say, look, I would like to do this and I can do this. I do not know that with the level of education that we have now, unless you go to one of these super expensive schools, I don't know that you can confidently say that about a teenager right now, a younger teenager. I don't know.
So Adichie occurs, or rather reoccurs it like about 3 or 4 times, you know. For obvious reasons, she's a beacon of light. She's a symbol of hope. She wrote the 21st century Things Fall Apart. In popular.
Okay. This is him.
And then you're a Chimamanda boy, and you wear that proudly. Adichie aside, the next heavyweight we have is Teju Cole. He's American, though of Nigerian descent. Benokri is British. They was born and raised in Nigeria. Bro, most Nigerians don't know him, He's like our third heavyweight. Is it? I think so, personally. Outside, the duo of and
Shoyinka. Okay. That's all after the two of them.
So we do not have any other Nigerian heavyweights who is without American or British affiliations, including Chigozie Obioma, who resides in the US. It's almost like we cannot stand on our own. Why do you think that is so?
Okay, so I mean, I'm usually not really sometimes talking about film. Somebody sent a message into the OAP. I was just an analyst on the show, was asking about how if there was like an opportunity for like marketing movies in the way they do in the US and stuff like that, and why people are not doing so much of that locally. And I was saying that Nollywood cannot outgrow the economy that's funding it. So the same thing too with literature. If, as the essay that I was saying, you can't really discuss an incredibly wide readership, this means that everybody is going to be subject to fighting for the same pittance for this particular thing. How big is the economy that's going to support something like that? So you then have to go to a bigger economy. That, okay, there's the US and there's maybe Europe and there's the UK. And so they that have the biggest crisis. They also have like an infrastructure that supports it. I think they say in France, for instance, the Concorde, their own big price, that there's no, I think it's €1 or something. But you're most assured that if you win that thing, the sale of your movie is like 3 billion. Do you get it? So the point is, you need to have that infrastructure supports writing to make it work. Unfortunately, I don't think we have ever had it. And so this is another thing again, beyond the essays. I also have posed other cost issues back in the day. I remember writing at some points, of course, I was being outrageous, but it's true that I don't think Achebe's Things Fall Apart in the Nigerian book.
Yeah.
I remember that, yeah. My angle was that it's a book that was entirely supported, brought into prominence, praised by the West. I doubt very much that if that book was a book that the West not embrace, we're talking about it the way we talk about it here. You understand? So it means that even our OGs needed the white man support, needed the West to kind of become what we think of as OGs. And that was when our country was supposedly better.
Yeah.
That was before Netflix showed up. Now that you have all of these distractions, all of these things that are competing with your time, economy is harder, so you have to work maybe longer hours. What is the time you then have to read a book?
Yeah.
So it means that the people who have a better economy probably will have more time to say, hey, they can read a book. So if that doesn't happen in your country, it happens elsewhere. That's elsewhere. We're now have to be the place where something big happens. I remember there was a tweet recently about how Adichie's books have sold like a particular number of copies and compared to what she sold in the West. And so it was not practical for us to be thinking about Adichie writing for us anymore because it's a business. So that tweet kind of went a little viral and people, of course, were insulting the person who had tweeted that. And I was like, okay, so apparently somebody had said, okay, the numbers were wrong in that I think she had sold more than the person said in the tweet locally. But irrespective, the point is, even if Adichie sold 100 million copies in Nigeria, she sold 3 billion copies in the West. So it is still a lopsided equation. You understand? And so what that means is that who exactly will she now be catering to? Because Adichie is not a self-published author. There's an incredible business infrastructure behind what she's doing. Who are those people going to be interested in servicing the most? You, who is buying a fraction of what they're buying in the West. It can't be. Sure. You understand? So that's the thing. So, again, Nigerian literature cannot be bigger than Nigerian economy.
Yeah.
It's not possible. Like I said, all of this is also tied back to education. If you do not now have great education, it means that there will be less people who are winning, or fewer people rather, matter how stale, even if you're Shakespeare in Nigerian state, you're still going to have like a very small proportion of them who are going to want you to engage with it. And so that's where the wahala is at. So I don't know. I feel like we need good news, but it was a Lenin's essay, so I guess this reaction has to be more. Has to be
and to even espouse what you said about Achebe, you know.
Yeah.
Put the education of the British protected child.
The British,
not the protected. So your essay didn't spare like other aspects of the culture, you know, film, music, writing, etc. You lamented the absence of Scorsese. You can identify as an aspiring Scorsese, but you lamented the absence of Scorsese, and rather the proliferation of banner food on YouTube, with no corresponding increase in Ejimofes. We are 200 million people. Is this a shortage of talent problem? Is there something else extrinsic that makes things the way they are?
I feel, a lot of these things are all related, but okay, I do think, honestly, and I've did this before, which of course caused its own amount of backlash on the internet. Do I say this like, starts another round of all others? You know, so there are times when this is not an absolute, but there are times when I think that we have a cultural problem. And I think this was one of my last problems with Twitter, where I said that I don't think that writing is particularly inherent to the Nigerian. And it looks to me like many of our cultures hardly produced writing. They depended more on like oral tradition, the griots and all of that, you know, which of course is fine for their stuff. But I don't think that kind of technology survives. There's a reason why we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. These people wrote those things down. But if the griot dies, how effective is memory? That's the one thing. How effective is it? What they call tradition discourse, that this other person will say exactly what he was told. So there's all kinds of problems, all kinds of efficiency problems with the way we have transmitted information over generations. I'm a writer, so it means my bias is very writing based. So I have a serious problem with that, with that lack of writing culture. Of course, we have the CBD and a few others, but I do think on the one hand, those are rather rudimentary forms, but let's not get into all of that now. But even if we did, even if the CBD is the greatest kind of writing script ever invented, it still is not enough, because that's just like no culture. Across the many cultures we have in Nigeria, I don't think more than a handful of them developed like a writing thing that kind of has survived. So that's like its own thing. So in my head, I'm thinking to myself that maybe it's just not something that is intrinsic to our culture, but it's not something that cannot be developed. I mean, this is the part that people were, of course, not willing to like engage with me on the internet. I think that there is a way those things can be developed. And so we need to figure out how to develop that. Do I think that we need more emo fairs and maybe fewer daily movies? I would say yes. That's my personal bias. Yes, I will say that all the time. Do we need more? Do we need less Lekkywood banal YouTube, Lekkywood, you know? Yes. And we need more emo fairs. Yes, that's my personal belief. I will take some of the Lekkywood stuff, but I will take a lot more of the emo fairs, because I think both of them can exist. But right now what's happening is only one seems to have a life, the other one seems to almost be dead, if not because of a few people who are trying to like do that. And the thing about Scorsese too is that I want somebody who thinks about the culture. So in a sense, like I said, I have now written maybe 2 or 3 essays that has looked at the lay of the land for literature and reflected upon it and written about it from a personal perspective, and also like looking objectively at what is happening. I would like very much if there was a filmmaker who could also do that for us, who could say, hey, since 1999, when we came back to democracy, here's what I think about what is happening. It can be in form of a thriller film, a crime drama, a regular drama, a domestic drama, a political thriller. It can be any particular genre. So we are right in that Kemede Tiba's King of Boys did that to some extent. I'm saying that I want to see more and more of stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant when I said that there's a lot of marvels, but not enough successes.
Yeah.
I just want people who are willing to say, hey, here's where the culture is at. Here's what I think about the culture. Yes, too few. So I'll take Emo Fairs, I'll take the King of Boys, and I'll take, I don't know, the rich man and his servant falling in love on Lekki. I want all 3. But it feels to me like the Emo Fairs are almost non-existent. There's 2 of them. There's maybe like 5 of the King of Boys. And there's like 200. But exactly of the Rich Man Fall in Love with His Mate, you get. So I just want like some kind of parity, or not so much of a huge disparity between all three inputs, subgenres. I honestly do think that sometimes I do not know necessarily that, because these things again, like I said, I'm a writer, so my bias is really writing. These things, and writing, by the way, at least very good writing, is closely aligned with thinking.
Yeah.
It's like, and so what that tells me is that if I see that you are not writing well, and I'm not talking about on the level of storytelling, just writing your thoughts and everything, it feels to me like it means that there's a little bit of a thinking problem here. Unfortunately, I don't think that Nigerian education encourages a lot of thought. You were in school, you studying whatever. I studied pharmacy. There's a lot of cramming going on.
Yeah.
This is how it is, my guy. When I go into the hall, I want to see the exact, like that's what you are being told by the lecturers. So what that does is that it dulls your thinking faculties, and I think that's then reverberates across society over time. Unless we fix that, I think that I will keep thinking at least until it changes. That is a cultural problem. Now, this is different, and this is something me and the filmmaker had this back and forth on the internet over this. I don't think it's genetic. I think it's cultural. And I think there's a difference between that. Genetic means that we are incapable of ever figuring it out. Cultural is that we have been incapable of figuring it out up until this particular moment. But when somebody shows up and says, hey, this is how you can do it, I think it might be possible for us to like switch up and then do it. So like Asians or whatever it is, they grew up and instantly knew how to code. But somehow, many other countries have learned how to do some of the things that these people could do. You want to get to a place where, okay, we have a cultural deficit. Somebody gets into power and the person's job is say, I will fix it. And that's kind of how the culture goes and develops.
I'm happy with the way you answered that. So you talk about how, thinking is basically what writers should be doing. In the last decade, there's been a very steep rise in the number of young Nigerians seeking and getting into MFA programs. It's almost as if they've joined the bandwagon of healthcare workers and some tech bulls who see the West as the only way out.
Yeah.
We can't blame them. The writer has to chop. How injurious do you think it is to a nation's fabric when writers, who should be the thinkers of a generation, unlike doctors and tech bulls, flee in such manner?
Oof. I feel like it's so funny, it's almost like you've been around me for the past couple of weeks, because all the things that you're asking, a few persons have kind of like made comments about it that are related to it in a sense. I was speaking with yesterday again with Cheta Wanze, the political political was talking about how, and I know this before, but we were talking about something and then he brought it up. He was talking about why it's important that a culture or a country or a people have common myths. Shane Boss is named Christopher Nolan, the British director, is doing the Odyssey based on what's it called? And those things are like important to Western culture. For centuries, for decades and decades and decades, till whenever, those things will always be important. And these people think of those things as things that bind them. I feel, okay, our high culture, this is kind of what it is. So when writers are living in groups, who's going to write our own one? You get the past 10 years, the past 20 years of Nigerian life. Here is what it means. Here's what I think it means. How do you deal with the canon? How do you say, okay, these are our common myths? If you are growing up today in Nigeria, okay, so we are kind of lucky in that. Although I don't know how lucky we are, but at least our parents are lucky. Yoshenka was actually, there's things fall apart. There's like most of them, Congese, harvest and stuff like that. There's Nigeria, all of those things. Those things kind of are a lot to people across the generation that, okay, these two persons were there and this book is like important. That's why today, even if honest, I don't think highly about some of the portions, not all of it, portions of things fall apart in the way it is written. But I cannot argue with the importance of that book. And there are people of my first generation who would want to give me a hot slap if I don't say anything negative about the book. You get? Because it means something to them collectively. But my point is that's kind of how you build a culture. The people who are going to do that are going to be the artists. It really cannot be the tech bros. It really has to be the artist. So that's like the major thing that we are going to lose with all of these departures from the country.
Yeah.
You hear people talk about, I guess, great stories that came out from Obama's era, there'll be, of course, a lot of stuff about Trump. What exactly are you going to talk about for Obasanjo's era, for Yar'Adua's era, for Jonathan's era? What are you going to be looking at? You get? So we are living in times that are just going to really disappear. And it's not like we are even in a country where journalism is so great. That is, the US can say, okay, our novelists can fail, but the New Yorker magazine will have like a bunch of profiles, a bunch of feature stories that tells where we have been at. The New York Times will do that. The Financial Times will do something for the UK, The Economist. All of these great big journalism platforms will do stuff that means something, even if our novelists are failing to do it. We don't even have that here.
We don't have a chronicler of our time.
Yes. And everybody who should probably be doing this is going to leave. You get? So we are lamenting the health of the nation when we talk about doctors who are leaving. We are lamenting the decline in our innovation. We talk about our tech bros who are leaving. We are, technically speaking, lamenting the very soul of the country we are discussing right as well, going to leave. So it's in a sense, the country that is serious will have to understand this and say, hey, how do we change it?
We've talked about, the death of Nigerian literature, and perhaps the comatose nature or the comatose state of Nigerian culture. So you studied pharmacy, you've never practiced, you've been writing since you finished NYSC, you've won continental awards, you've been on major film panels across Europe and even in the Middle East, you've set up a literary journal.
And a film once.
And a film journal as well. What is next for Oris? Are we expecting a book? Because one of the points that people who didn't like your essay brought out was, he's never even written a book. How can you criticize so much? What is next for Oris? What should we be looking out for?
Like we just say, it's my collection of my essays. That is, let's say, a first issue, because I've written things, like I said, since 2010. So I'm trying to compile my, quote, interventions, my essays in literature, in pop music, and in film. So that's going to come up for the end of the years. Essays and interviews and reviews on Nigerian pop, on Afrobeats, literature, and knowledge. So that's what is next, I think. I just want to pick one essay or one interview or one review of a particular person who I think is important to this scene in that period. I have been doing these three things, or doing lots of things in these three spaces. Let's just have it there. Now, but in terms of the structural reason as to why I never did a book before now is, I did not live in Nigeria. One of the things that I think Nigeria and Lagos does is that it gives you so many stories, but never gives you the time to actually write them.
Yeah.
You just have so many ideas. There's something that are happening on the street. If I go out right now, something's probably happening there. But where would you have the 3 months to settle down and say, hey, I'm going to do this? I have been exceedingly lucky, to be able to do this without leaving the country and have like a decent life, at least financially or materially. But I know that it has taken other things out of, I guess, my life, so to speak, in that. So one of them is like writing a book early. This is kind of what I was talking about in the spent youth. Because if I had got and joined KPMG or PwC or First Bank or Access Bank or GT Bank or something, then maybe I'll probably be like an ED or something of that nature by now. And the issue of like hustling will be entirely out of the way. But I stopped doing this. And I can't say I have regrets, but like I said, I'm not doing badly at all. And I'm not saying poetry is easier, although I do think a number of poets that hate me are idiots. I do think that it's different for poets in that you can, collect your five poems from wherever for 50,000 years and just put that, whatever it is, and start publish it somewhere in your neighborhood. For a person like me who is who's a thinker, who wants to do decent work. You need that time, and I haven't had the time. I mean, that's also my fault. Not blaming anybody. But yes, there's the book coming out before the end of the year, and hopefully that introduces certain persons, or maybe more than people who hate me on Twitter. So I'm not just a guy who is tweeting stuff that is agreed on the internet. And I've put in, I think it's an amount of work, and across different fields and across different countries. So the book is again, it's in 3 parts. There's a part focused on my stuff on literature. It's a part focused on my stuff on pop music. And it's a part focused on my stuff on film. So the literature part is more like literature, essays like this, for instance, or some of those I've written in this nature, looking at the landscape, but also some of my travel essays. So for the first time I went to Paris, one of the things that pushed me, the minute I pushed me to Paris was Hemingway. Because like I said earlier, I read this interview with him in the Paris Review interviews collection, like years when I was in school. And I was like, hey, I'm in Paris. I need to go and find where this guy lived. I went to Switzerland actually to see japa, Zimbabwean writer. That essay is also in the collection. The one about trauma is also in the collection.
And on that note, we round up this thrilling episode of the Late James podcast, where we've discussed with Oris Aigbokhaevbolo and his controversial 2023 essay, The Death of Nigerian Literature. Join us on the Late James podcast on our next episode as we discuss another book, another writing by a writer of African origin. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much.